For years, Adolf Hitler's image was constructed through a combination of manipulated speeches, political maneuvering, and the intentional concealment of uncomfortable aspects of his more personal side. They portrayed him as a leader, determined to boost the country's morale and cleanse Germany, but they obscured key details of his off-screen life and his own contradictions. From the war years until long afterward, official reports, such as psychological studies commissioned by the United States Intelligence Agency, began to examine more intimate and unknown aspects of Hitler. Fears, strange habits, obsessions, and manias that did not fit with the image of firm leadership they sought to sell to the world. Although certain details came to light over time, most of these things remained hidden under a layer of theater and control. How much more about the real Hitler remains hidden beneath the persona they constructed? Number 20. The frustrated artist who ended up living like a tramp. Adolf Hitler was a mediocre student. In 1904, at just 16 years old, he dropped out of school with no merits other than a passing grade in drawing. It was the only thing he was good at. For the next 3 years, he didn't seek employment or study. He wandered aimlessly around Linz, only sketching occasionally in his notebooks. He would later say that those years were the happiest of his life. He then traveled to Vienna with the idea of becoming an artist. He aspired to enter the Academy of Fine Arts. He submitted his works for the entrance exam, convinced his skills were sufficient, but he failed the test. It was a crushing blow. The following year he returned with more practice, but the result was even worse. Not only was he rejected again, but he was barred from applying again. One of the professors recommended he try architecture, seeing that his drawings focused on buildings, not people. But without a high school diploma, that option was impossible. His path was suddenly closed. He was so sure he would pass that the rejection came as a shock. Instead of returning home, he decided to stay in Vienna. He didn't want to return empty-handed. Although he described the city as an unbearable mix of cultures, he also knew it was a world-class artistic center. He wasn't about to give up on his dream because of what he considered the biased judgment of Jewish professors. Over time, he came to believe that it was a Jewish teacher who had rejected him. Years later, already in power, he ordered the elimination of several members of that same academy during the occupation of Austria. At that stage, he lived practically without resources. He earned some money shoveling snow, helping with luggage at the station, or working sporadically on construction sites. He ate in soup kitchens and slept in public shelters or outdoors. Even so, he never stopped painting. He thought that perhaps one day he would meet an influential artist who would help him. So he spent hours in cafes frequented by painters, although he never made a name for himself in that environment. During those years, he produced more than 1,000 drawings, watercolors, and paintings. Over time, his situation improved slightly. He managed to support himself exclusively by selling postcards and paintings of views of Vienna. Many of his buyers were Jewish merchants. Despite this, his resentment toward them grew. He later acknowledged that it was in Vienna that his hatred of Jews began to take shape. This prejudice also served as an excuse for him to avoid military service, as he did not want to serve alongside Slavs or Jews. When he left Vienna, he said that the city had been the hardest, but also the most formative period of his life. He entered it as an aimless young man. He left as a lonely man with fixed, increasingly radical ideas. Number 19. The animal lover who ordered millions of people to be killed. Adolf Hitler maintained a plant-based diet, especially during the years of World War II. His inclination toward this type of diet, it has been suggested, was related to the thinking of composer Richard Wagner, who linked German spiritual renewal with vegetarianism. Although there were discrepancies between those who claim Hitler avoided meat products and those who maintain he only partially did so, the truth is that toward the end of his life he presented himself as a convinced vegetarian. In his later years, he reproved those who ate meat, pointing out that they were eating the remains of dead animals. In his autobiographical book, he spoke of his appreciation for animals as a sign of his moral superiority. He also believed that a plant-based diet would help improve both individual health and the spiritual regeneration of the people. However, there are reports that he still occasionally ate animal products in his 1930s. Several publications presented him as an example of respect for animals. A magazine of the German reformist movement described him as a staunch opponent of animal torture and an opponent of vivisection. According to accounts collected by Hugh Trevor Roper, Hitler spoke of himself as a vegetarian and asserted that in the future humanity would stop eating meat. Even in private meetings, he mentioned that he could not share meat with Arab leaders due to his beliefs. In private conversations, he would often emphasize the virtues of raw vegetables, fruits, and grains, even recommending them to children and soldiers. He would sometimes spoil the appetites of his companions by recounting scenes from slaughterhouses, intending to discourage them from eating animal products. According to B. Wilson, when he saw the discomfort of others, he would take the opportunity to accuse them of being weak and hypocritical. An English report published in 1938 about his Alpine residence described his kitchen as full of fruits and vegetables and emphasized his exacting standards. His cook prepared meat-free dishes that were also visually pleasing. According to Goebbels, Hitler devoted long talks to promoting a vegetarian diet, although he acknowledged that it could not be imposed as a general policy during the conflict. Nevertheless, he hoped to implement it after the war. Martin Bormann had a greenhouse built in Berchtesgaden to ensure a constant supply of fruits and vegetables. He also avoided the use of cosmetics because they contained animal ingredients and mocked Eva Braun for using them. Leon de Grelle, an SS officer, recalled that he rejected both mammal and fish meat and only accepted eggs because they did not involve direct slaughter of the animal. Evidence has been found suggesting that his diet was influenced by his digestive problems. From a young age, he suffered from stomach discomfort, excessive sweating, and flatulence. In private letters, he explained that he preferred fruits and vegetables to feel better. He also worried about developing cancer, the disease from which his mother died. However, some experts maintain that Hitler was not a strict vegetarian. The British Vegetarian Society reported that vegetarian associations in Germany were closed under his regime, although more for political than dietary reasons. Authors such as Robert Payne maintain that the myth of vegetarianism was a propaganda invention. Witnesses like Chef Diony Lucas claim to have seen him eating meat. His secretary, Traudl Junger, said he avoided animal products, but his cook secretly included broth or fat, which often caused him physical discomfort. His nutritionist, Marlene von Exner, added bone marrow to his dishes. His personal physician, Theodor Morell, gave him daily injections with compounds derived from animal organs such as liver, glands, and placenta. Although he considered himself a vegetarian, his diet was far from entirely plant-based. Number 18. He wept for his mother and then separated millions from his own. Adolf Hitler remained by his mother's side throughout her illness. Clara, who suffered from breast cancer, was cared for at home while her son took care of minor chores and was attentive to every detail. The disease progressed rapidly and painfully. He, then a teenager without a full education or job, spent almost all his time by her side. When Clara died, he burst into tears. Some witnesses recalled that he couldn't contain himself even during the funeral. He remained silent for most of the day and didn't want to speak to anyone for weeks. It was one of the few occasions on which he openly showed affection. Throughout his life, he didn't speak of her often, but when he did, it was in a solemn and respectful tone. That loss marked him permanently. He never again established a similar bond with another person. He maintained distant relationships with his sisters, his stepmother, and the women he met as an adult. Those closest to him noticed his emotional coldness, although there was one clear exception: the memory of his mother. He didn't mention her to provoke pity or as an excuse. She was, quite simply, someone he had truly loved. In contrast, years later, it was the same man who ordered mass deportations of entire families. He systematically separated mothers from their children at train stations and on sorting ramps. During the operation to expel entire communities, he showed no sign of remorse. Decisions were made quickly and without personal contact. He didn't visit the locations, he didn't hear screams, he didn't see tears, he simply signed orders or issued instructions from tightly closed offices. The women were sent to one place, the children to another. Some were forcibly transferred, others lured with promises of jobs or family reunions. The separations were permanent. In many cases, neither party survived. Years later, some of those directly responsible declared that everything was done under the direction of the supreme leader, who had given clear instructions on how to proceed. The paradox was evident, but he never acknowledged it. He who had once cared for his sick mother, who had once mourned her loss with genuine pain, became the architect of a machine that destroyed millions of family ties. There are no known public statements in which he expressed concern for the suffering of women affected by the deportations. His vision of society was organized by groups, not individuals. In the regime's internal reports, they spoke of efficiency, not human consequences. Mothers were numbers, decisions were reduced to statistics. Meanwhile, in the few private letters that survive, there is not a single mention of the contradiction between what she experienced and what she caused. That part was buried, along with the memories of her youth and the image of the only person for whom she ever shed tears. Number 17. He fought against tobacco more forcefully than against hunger or war. Adolf Hitler didn't touch either alcohol or cigarettes. From a young age, he chose to stay away from both. He was never seen drinking in groups or smoking out of habit. For him, these things contributed nothing and only harmed the body. It wasn't a phase or a public pose. He continued to do so always, even in private conversations or under pressure. This way of life also influenced those around him. It was rare to see bottles near him, and many avoided lighting a cigarette when he was present. At his mountain residence, the Berghof, the rule was clear: no smoke and no drinks. Although some guests occasionally broke it, most respected the environment he imposed. He believed that their bodies should be kept clean of harmful substances. This wasn't his sole practice. He also promoted it through the government. During his term, anti-smoking campaigns were carried out. Posters and publications warned about the harmful effects of smoking, with particular attention to pregnant women. Smoking on public transport was frowned upon and was banned in several government offices. Furthermore, medical studies were ordered to reveal respiratory problems linked to smoking. At that time, few countries treated smoking as a matter of public health. When it came to drinking, there were no laws prohibiting it, but he preferred to steer clear. He never toasted, not even at official meetings or celebrations with military personnel. While other high-ranking officials drank wine or liquor, he stuck to herbal teas or water. Those who shared a table with him knew this wasn't out of courtesy. It was something he was very clear about. He believed it was essential to have a clear mind when making decisions. That lifestyle wasn't just about health. It was part of the image he wanted to project. He wanted to appear disciplined, organized, and in control. He said the body should be cared for and that good citizens should avoid habits that weakened them. In that context, smoking or drinking were signs that someone wasn't taking care of themselves, either physically or mentally. Official anti-smoking campaigns continued to grow. Taxes on cigarettes were raised, and advertising was limited. They also attempted to reduce the habit among soldiers, although this was not always successful. Despite these contradictions, the official position remained firm, and Hitler continued to be associated with a vice-free life. In his daily routine, he ate lightly, drank tea, and walked frequently. There is no solid evidence that he abandoned these habits, not even in the final months of the regime. His doctor treated him with unusual methods, but they didn't use sedatives containing alcohol. Even in the worst moments, he didn't even touch liquor or tobacco. The idea that he was a teetotaler persisted in documents, photos, and testimonies. Although he led a state that caused millions of deaths, his personal routine avoided anything that would harm his body. While he sent others to the front or to the camps, he steadfastly pursued his life without alcohol or cigarettes. Number 16. The great Nazi orator only repeated gestures that he memorized in front of the mirror. In 1925, Hitler locked himself in a room alone to hone his speech. He stood in front of the mirror and rehearsed his speeches with no one else around. He repeated phrases, moved his arms, and changed his facial expressions. He wanted to see how he looked when he spoke. In these rehearsals, he didn't improvise. He tried out several ways of saying the same thing until he found the most powerful one. While he was speaking, he played recordings of his own voice. He listened to himself to correct mistakes. Sometimes he would stop, fall silent, and repeat everything from the beginning. He didn't like how a sentence sounded and would change it. He measured every pause. He made sure each word carried weight. He left nothing to chance. To improve his posture, he asked his personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, to take pictures of him while he rehearsed. Hoffmann would snap the camera while he raised his arm, shouted, or made an angry face. Hitler then watched the images closely. He commented on them one by one. He would say things like, "That looks bad," or "I'll never do that gesture again." Some photos were thrown away, others were kept for reference. He didn't want to look ridiculous. His image was everything. He studied every angle, every expression, every hand movement. If a pose didn't suit him, he discarded it. He repeated the same gestures over and over again until they were just right. Every time he found one that worked, he memorized it. He knew he'd have to repeat it on stage. The rehearsals weren't just for speaking better, they were part of his overall preparation. He wanted his physical presence to have a powerful presence. The goal was for people to feel they were standing in front of someone with authority. What he said wasn't enough. He had to look like a leader. He rehearsed all of this alone in front of the mirror, in silence, day after day. The photos of those training sessions were saved. Some were published later. In them, Hitler is seen repeating the same gestures he would later use at mass rallies. They weren't casual. They weren't improvised. Every movement had been practiced in private before appearing in public. For years, these rehearsals were part of his routine. Hitler left no details undone. What seemed natural in his speeches was the result of many hours in front of the mirror. Every word, every look, every gesture came out as he wanted it to. He had rehearsed everything beforehand. Even the smallest movement had a reason. That wasn't improvised. Number 15. He planned the extermination, but never set foot in a concentration camp. Despite having promoted the entire extermination system, Hitler never set foot in a concentration camp. There are no images, records, or testimonies to the contrary. Throughout the war, he steered clear of such places. He received periodic reports on transfers and executions, but he never visited Dachau, Auschwitz, Treblinka, or any of the detention or extermination centers. Researcher Nicholas Wachsmann emphasizes that Hitler is not mentioned in his book about the camps, while Heinrich Himmler personally oversaw all the facilities. According to the Times of Israel, Hitler limited himself to reading reports sent by the SS without observing executions or inspecting camp conditions. He kept logistics at a distance, delegating practical tasks. The Telegraph also makes it clear that he never spoke publicly about the extermination. He expressed himself in euphemisms like relocations or special measures without directly alluding to the systematic murder. Not only did he avoid visits, but he also maintained his clean image. While Himmler toured crematoria and barracks, Hitler restricted himself to offices, his residence at the Berghof or the bunker, receiving leaked reports and not seeing the hard details. Close associates confirmed that he preferred to stay out of the loop. His close photographer Heinrich Hoffmann described how Hitler gave the order and waited for it to be carried out, and that was all. The decision was deliberate. He managed the genocide from a distance. By delegating to Himmler, he maintained command without facing the visual or moral horror. Even in the final moments when the machinery of death increased its pace, Hitler did not approach. He did not inspect ovens, chambers, or rail cars. He never requested any photographs or witnessed any corpses. His role was that of orderer, not eyewitness. Issue 14. Just one testicle, the medical secret Hitler never wanted to reveal. A medical report written in 1923 partially confirms one of the most widely spread rumors about Hitler. The document indicates that he suffered from cryptorchidism, meaning that only one of his testicles had descended into the scrotum. The report was prepared by Dr. Josef Breinsteiner while Hitler was imprisoned in a Bavarian prison after the failed Munich Putsch in 1923. This report is part of the book Hitler as a Prisoner in Landsberg am Lech, 1923/24, by historian Peter Fleischmann. The doctor noted this condition in a document signed on November 12th after examining prisoner number 45. It states that Hitler was in good health but had cryptorchidism on his right side. Several German media outlets recalled this issue on Saturday, December 19, 2015, and linked it to the famous song sung by British soldiers during World War II, "Hitler has only got one ball," to the tune of the Colonel Bogey March. But this diagnosis contradicts another widespread version. There is no evidence that Hitler lost a testicle due to a war wound, as claimed by the story about a grenade during World War I. The medical report mentioning this condition was kept hidden for decades, and it wasn't until 2010 that it came to light when an attempt was made to sell it at auction along with 500 other documents related to Hitler's time imprisoned in Landsberg. The The documents were eventually confiscated by German authorities. Peter Fleischmann, director of the Nuremberg State Archives, reviewed all these documents for years and now includes the most important details in his book. The book analyzes Hitler's daily life inside the prison. The Süddeutsche Zeitung newspaper emphasized that despite being imprisoned, Hitler enjoyed many comforts. This was possible because of his close relationship with the prison director. He was addressed as Sir. The inmates' cells were improved and his food was not supplied from the prison kitchens but from outside. The book also includes short biographies of the 330 people who visited him during his confinement. Hitler began a hunger strike as soon as he arrived in prison. It was also there that he wrote part of the first volume of Mein Kampf, the text in which he organized his political ideas and recorded the racist and anti-Semitic thinking of the Nazi movement. That work would be sold again in Germany decades later, thanks to the release of the copyright that until then had been controlled by the state of Bavaria. Number 13. Hitler and Parkinson's, the disease that secretly deteriorated his body and mind. It is proven that Adolf Hitler suffered from idiopathic Parkinson's disease. No clinical signs or medical history were detected that suggested a type of Parkinsonism linked to brain infections. The diagnosis was made by Dr. Max de Krinis in early 1945. He notified the SS High Command. The SS leadership decided that treatment should be initiated based on a special formula for Parkinson's, designed to be administered by a physician. Even so, that treatment was never given to Hitler. This leads one to believe that the SS leadership was considering getting rid of a leader already severely damaged by the disease. Two very distinct aspects can be observed in Hitler's behavior. On the one hand, he had a personality typical of those suffering from Parkinson's before it progressed, a rigid mind with no ability to change, zero flexibility, and an obsessive attitude toward details that drove others to despair. On the other hand, he displayed behaviors typical of an antisocial profile. He showed no respect for rules or values, tended to manipulate, lie, and had emotional outbursts that he could not control. This mixture of his personality led him to convince himself, without ever questioning it, that he had a unique mission to fulfill. And it also led him to constantly seek validation and attention. Evaluating his way of thinking and behaving from a medical perspective allows us to better understand some of the patterns that marked his life and his role in history. Analyzing him from a neuropsychiatric perspective helps shed more light on how his mind functioned at key moments. Hitler combined clear physical symptoms of an advanced neurological disorder with a behavior that revealed underlying imbalances. This dual condition led him to remain steadfast in his beliefs, refusing to accept any other opinion, while at the same time acting destructively, regardless of the consequences for others. It wasn't just a physical illness. There was also a deterioration in his way of dealing with people and confronting reality. As his movements became more clumsy and his gestures less controlled, his demeanor also became more withdrawn, more isolated, and more dangerous. This worsened over time. The combination of his neurological condition and his character made him increasingly incapable of making rational decisions. In the final months of his life, nothing he said or did could be separated from his health. The signs were visible, but within the regime, no one dared to openly question him. His entourage kept him going, but they also knew he could no longer continue in this way. His medical history, along with subsequent analyses, offer a direct window into how this ailing leader truly functioned. Issue 12. The Day He Almost Drowned, the childhood trauma that turned Hitler into a water phobic. An old clipping found in German archives recounts how a small boy was pulled alive from a river, supporting the story that Hitler, as a child, nearly drowned. At the time, he was living with his family on Kapuzinerstrasse in Passau, Bavaria, just across the border from Austria, where he was born. A Catholic priest named Max Tremmel, who later became one of Europe's foremost organists, recounted that his predecessor in Passau, Johann Kehrberger, had been the one to rescue him. Before he died in 1980, Tremmel recounted that Kehrberger, still a teenager, saw the boy struggling in the Inn River and jumped in to rescue him. Hitler never mentioned this story publicly. But a short article from the Donau-Zeitung newspaper from January 1894 was found in Passau. The text stated that a boy fell into the river after the ice broke and that a young man jumped in to save him. The newspaper, which was left-wing at the time, called him a brave comrade. Between 1892 and 1894, Hitler lived in that city, where he adopted a German accent instead of an Austrian one. Since he was born in April 1888, he was 4 years old at the time of the accident. The writer Anna Elisabeth Rosmus, in her book Out of Passau, Leaving a City Hitler Called Home, also reported on the incident. She explained that the banks of the Inn River were a common area for children to play. In 1894, while he was with other children, Adolf fell into the water. The river was flowing rapidly and very cold, having come straight from the mountains. The son of the owner of the house where he lived managed to reach him in time and pull him out. Although as an adult he recounted anecdotes about playing on the shore, he never spoke of the day he nearly drowned. In Passau, however, everyone knew what had happened. It was said that from then on he never went into the water again, and that he never learned to swim. The boy's name did not appear in the article, but historians believe it was him, given the date and address. After that incident, he avoided public restrooms and rivers. That accident marked his childhood. His fear of water became part of his daily life. He played near the river but didn't touch it. His silence about what happened also formed part of the character he later built. For those who lived in that city, the image of that rescued child lived on for generations. Number 11. The Night Commander. He made war decisions while the world slept. Hitler slept little and preferred to work at night. According to Allied intelligence documents, he would start late and continue until the early hours of the morning, sometimes until 3 or 4. After dinner, he would stay up reading papers, watching movies, or talking with those closest to him. He often needed medication to stay awake or to get a few hours of rest. His routine didn't include anything early. He usually got up after mid-morning when his assistant handed him the diaries and reports. At the Berghof or in the bunker, casual meetings began after dinner and continued into the evening. He would receive his doctors, assistants, or clerks, and during these meetings he would give orders, review reports from the front, or discuss ideas with his team. Key decisions were made during that same shift. It was in the early morning when he was most focused. He read army reports, signed papers, or gave detailed instructions. This habit continued for years, even when the war was already going badly. He didn't usually start his day early. Reports indicate that he almost never did anything before noon. Those who worked with him knew that his entire schedule was organized around his sleep schedule and his nighttime activity schedule. At night inside the bunker, everything was very quiet. Only those closest to him participated in the meetings, and what was decided there was later shared with the others. During those hours, he didn't see anyone else. Witnesses like Heinz Linger said he barely slept and that his energy came from constant medication. His personal doctor was responsible for providing him with what he needed, depending on the time of day. That habit of staying up until dawn continued even when all was lost. Inside the bunker, the review meetings continued well into the night. Then he'd sleep for a couple of hours and start again. He also spoke with Eva Braun at night. They discussed personal matters, movies or music, while the rest of the team awaited further orders. Everything revolved around the schedule he imposed himself. British and German archives indicate that he could sustain himself on just 3 or 4 hours of sleep, but only with the constant help of stimulants and sedatives, mixed according to the daily situation. Everyone who worked with him adjusted to this altered rhythm. Command meetings, reports, and internal tasks were conducted at night. This pattern remained the same even when he was locked underground in the final days of the regime. This nocturnal habit ended up being the way everything around him functioned. While everyone else rested, he continued making decisions that directly influenced the course of the conflict. Number 10. The dictator who feared his own food, Hitler's tasters. In his Wolf's Lair retreat, Hitler lived with the constant worry of being poisoned. To minimize any risk, he implemented a fixed system. A group of women had to taste what he was going to eat before him. He didn't do this for health reasons. It was a regular part of his daily routine. About 15 young women were assigned to this task. They were from villages near the compound. They had to taste the same dishes, wait a while, and make sure nothing happened. Only then did he begin to eat. Margot Volk was one of those women. Although she never saw him in person, her role was clear: to verify that there was no poison in what was served to him. That scene was repeated without change. Hitler's menus were completely vegetarian. He didn't eat meat or fish. He ate rice, pasta, vegetable broths, or boiled potatoes, all without ingredients of animal origin. This habit showed how suspicious he was of those around him. He didn't trust his cooks, his medical team, or those who cared for him. He believed anyone could try to kill him with food. There was a waiting period after each test. If any of the women showed symptoms, the dish was immediately discarded. Only when everything was in order did he sit down at the table. He never came forward. The fear was so strong that even the schedules of the surrounding area adapted to this dynamic. From the kitchen to mealtimes, everything was organized to follow this previous step. Their caution extended to that level. It wasn't just because of external enemies. Their own staff knew that this system couldn't be interrupted. Bypassing this filter meant being left out. After the July 1944 attack, this measure was reinforced. From that moment on, control became stricter and swifter. The atmosphere became more tense. Margot said she did this work for more than 2 years until the war forced her to leave. Although the front deteriorated, that habit didn't change. Number 9. Prescription drugs, the hidden dependence that accompanied him to the end. Before the Nazis took control, Germany was already a key hub for the production and sale of processed cocaine and other stimulants like LSD, morphine, and amphetamines, partly due to the country's economic and social crisis. However, when the regime came to power, these substances were banned in an attempt to give the country a cleaner image. This didn't eliminate drug use, but rather forced many to hide their vices, including high-ranking Nazis like Goering and even Hitler himself. Several of these chemicals were later sold as medicines for other uses. In Hitler's case, he began using them to soothe stomach discomfort, but over time he increased both the frequency and potency of his intake. He ended up using a frequent combination of opiates and cocaine, and even methamphetamines, to cope with the physical and mental effects of the conflict. This led to his health deteriorating steadily. At the same time, the military also used drugs as part of the war effort. A type of methamphetamine known as pervitin allowed soldiers to sustain themselves in combat for days on end. Number 8. Not a touch. His obsession with avoiding human contact. Hitler avoided physical contact in public and private. He disliked handshakes and rarely reciprocated spontaneous gestures of affection. At official events, he limited greetings to nods or the Nazi salute. In private encounters, he kept his distance even from people close to him. Those close to him knew this, and most avoided unnecessary physical contact. During official receptions, he didn't get too close to the guests. At the Berghof, his residence in Bavaria, meetings with visitors followed strict protocol. The seating arrangement was designed so that no one sat next to him. Conversations were one-sided, and he controlled the tone, timing, and distance. Physical displays of affection were rare. He treated Eva Braun coldly in front of others. He never hugged or kissed her in public. For years, their relationship was kept secret, and although she lived at the Berghof, she did not share meals with Hitler or appear at formal events. He limited contact even within his inner circle. In the Chancellery bunker, his habits didn't change. Even in the final days of the war, he avoided any physical contact with his immediate surroundings. His personal assistants, like Heinz Linger, knew to maintain their distance even when helping him dress or delivering items. Available photographs show him with his arms close to his body or saluting from a distance. In most images captured by official photographers, he stood erect, not approaching others. Even when receiving children or wounded soldiers, he barely touched them, with a few exceptions. During military meetings, he sat in an elevated position or at the end of the table. High-ranking officers entered with brief greetings, and conversations were one way. The structure of the environment was designed to reinforce the control of personal distance. The atmosphere was formal and rigid, with no room for spontaneous gestures. There is no evidence that Hitler gave hugs in public or displayed physical closeness with friends or collaborators. The only frequent gesture was the Nazi salute, which was obligatory in his presence. This salute, in addition to serving a political purpose, eliminated the need for direct physical contact. When traveling, he made sure to maintain his distance from the public. Although he sometimes waved from his car with the window down, he did not get out to wave. During parades or public appearances, contact with the crowds was controlled by security rings. Greetings were visual, never physical. The layout of his living quarters was also designed for isolation. At the Berghof, his bedroom and office were in a separate wing. He had his own dining room separated from the rest of the party. Visits were brief and formal, even when they involved close figures like Albert Speer or Joseph Goebbels. Eva Braun was one of the few people who had private access to Hitler, but even with her, the relationship was distant. They did not share a bedroom, and she was not present at most dinners or political meetings. There is no record of explicit gestures of affection between the two throughout the war. His dealings with party members were also formal. When welcoming new members or decorating soldiers, gestures were limited to a glance, a word, and the obligatory salute. He avoided presenting medals directly in the hand, and when he did, the contact was brief and perfunctory. Even with his personal physicians, he maintained his distance. Theodor Morell, his regular doctor, described how his consultations were quick and free of unnecessary contact. Any physical procedure had to be brief and precise. Hitler did not tolerate being touched for longer than necessary. When giving speeches, he did not greet anyone upon entering the podium. He took his position, spoke, and left without making physical contact with the audience or the organizers. Security surrounded him, but he did not intervene directly because he himself avoided any approach. During his years in power, Hitler had constant access to crowds, allies, heads of state, and party members. In all cases, he maintained controlled behavior without direct physical contact. Distance was part of his habitual behavior, both in public and private life. Number 7. The Führer without a license. He never learned to drive a car. He never obtained a license or learned to drive. Although he promoted motorways and accessible cars, Hitler never drove a vehicle. From his early years as a politician, he always traveled as a passenger. By the 1920s, he was already using cars provided by the party and financed by wealthy connections. His first car was a Selv, and soon after he acquired his first Mercedes thanks to close businessmen. Over time, he added more vehicles to his personal fleet. By 1925, he had already paid 26,000 marks for one of his Mercedes. He never drove them. He preferred to ride in the front seat next to the driver. His cars were modified to make it easier for him to wave to the crowds. They had a raised base under his seat and a grip on the windshield to stand on during parades. He had several chauffeurs. One of the first was Julius Schreck, who also acted as his escort. He was later replaced by Erich Kempka, who accompanied him on his travels for years. According to Kempka himself, Hitler never showed any interest in getting behind the wheel. Instead, he focused on checking his routes, maintaining punctuality, and observing his surroundings. The vehicles were part of his public image. He was photographed in multiple European cities in his Mercedes, whether traveling through Germany, entering Vienna, or on official visits to Prague. The cars had specific license plates, which made it possible to identify whether they were his property or for his exclusive use. On several occasions, he boasted that he had never had any accidents, not because he drove with caution, but because he demanded meticulous driving from his drivers. He constantly reminded them to adjust their speed to what they could see ahead. For him, the responsibility for any incident fell on the driver. He did not tolerate mistakes. During the war, some of his cars were captured. Several ended up in the hands of collectors, museums, or were dismantled. Some were identified by their license plates hidden under layers of paint, others by unique interior modifications. There were even confusions with models wrongly attributed to other regime leaders. But experts confirmed their authenticity by checking the serial numbers. After the fall of the Third Reich, cars that had been symbols of power became historical relics. Some are now on display in museums in Europe and North America. Others disappeared into private collections. There was never any indication that Hitler wanted to learn to drive, neither in his youth nor as a leader. For him, getting around by car was an extension of his role. It was never a personal activity. He preferred to remain a central figure, uninvolved in driving. He was never seen behind the wheel, and there are no records of him having even basic driving skills. Number 6. Who did Adolf Hitler admire? From a young age, Adolf Hitler was strongly attracted to public figures who shaped his way of thinking and influenced him throughout his life. He not only observed their ideas, but also drew from their styles, speeches, and attitudes to construct his own image. One of those who had the greatest impact on him was Richard Wagner. This German composer was known for his music centered on Germanic myths. Hitler listened to him frequently, especially his opera Parsifal, which moved him to tears. It wasn't just an aesthetic issue. In that music, Hitler saw a representation of what he believed to be his role in history. Wagner didn't just compose operas, he conveyed ideas about culture, race, and nation, which later aligned with the Nazi regime's propaganda. Another figure Hitler took as an example was Karl Lueger, mayor of Vienna at the end of the 19th century. He was a politician who combined charisma with anti-Semitic ideas. Hitler lived in Vienna as a young man and paid close attention to Lueger's way of speaking. He learned from him that an emotional speech, laden with symbolism and aimed at collective sentiment, could be more effective than a rational one. As he later recounted, he was impressed by Lueger's ability to win over the masses without elaborate arguments, only with style and presence. Friedrich Nietzsche also influenced him, although only superficially. Hitler borrowed from Nietzsche the idea of the Superman, a concept he adapted to his own vision of the Aryan race. However, he ignored much of Nietzsche's original thought, which rejected anti-Semitism and nationalism. Hitler quoted Nietzsche's quotes without following the philosopher's full meaning. He used his words to reinforce his theory of racial superiority, although the author did not write them with that intention. Another key figure in Hitler's development was Dietrich Eckart. He was a poet and one of the first members of the National Socialist Party. He was Hitler's first direct mentor, accompanying him from his early days in politics and introducing him to Germanic symbolism, runes, and certain mystical ideas. Eckart gave him space in the party's most radical circles and trained him in public speaking. When Eckart died in 1923, Hitler said that part of his own soul had gone with him. He considered him an irreplaceable figure, both for his political influence and his personal closeness. These figures were key in the construction of Hitler's public image. He used them as references to develop his style, his ideological vision, and his way of connecting with the public. None of them humanizes him, but all allow us to understand part of the structure upon which he built his leadership. They were examples that he studied, reinterpreted, and leveraged to consolidate himself as the absolute leader of the Third Reich. Number 5. Did he have a fake passport? The day the British forged his identity as a Jew. During World War II, a secret British intelligence group known as SOE fabricated a forged passport in Adolf Hitler's name. Created at the initiative of Winston Churchill and Hugh Dalton, this team operated from a London headquarters under cover names such as the Joint Technical Board and the Inter-Services Research Office. Its primary function was to sabotage, spy on, and collaborate with resistance groups in Nazi-occupied areas. The agents of this group were experts at forging all kinds of documents. Among them were criminals specializing in forgery who now worked for the British government. They produced permits, ID cards, and passports of such high quality that many were preserved intact after the war. One of the most curious was a passport printed with the name of Adolf Hitler, which also bore a large red J, the mandatory symbol identifying Jews in Germany. No one knows for sure why the SOE created this document. Some believe it was a simple provocation, a mockery designed to humiliate the Nazi regime. Others think it served to demonstrate to the Germans the level of detail the British intelligence services could achieve. Inside the forged document, Hitler was described as a painter, with physical details such as eye color, gender, and his characteristic short mustache. The visa was also forged. It was supposedly issued by the Immigration Department of the British Mandate for Palestine. According to this stamp, dated July 19, 1941, Hitler was granted permission to settle there as a permanent immigrant. The red J was also inside, complying with German regulations for passports of Jewish citizens. The passport wasn't the only such work carried out by the SOE. In other cases, they created forged documents that insinuated doubts about loyalty among Nazi commanders. One of the targets was Franz Halder, chief of the General Staff, who was credited with holding critical views toward Hitler. Forged stamps bearing the image of Heinrich Himmler were also printed to create confusion within the regime. The precision of these forgeries was so high that some managed to circulate undetected for some time. The case of Hitler's fake passport became one of the most notable examples of psychological warfare. Although it was never used in concrete operations, its existence demonstrated that the British could manipulate even the identity of the Nazi leader. The document is now part of historical archives and is direct evidence of the type of covert warfare that was waged behind the scenes. The passport, with its false information and entry stamp for Palestine, did not merely have symbolic value. It represented the ability of the Third Reich's enemies to ridicule it from within without firing a single bullet. Number 4. The Ritual of Power, Silent Breakfasts Facing the Alps. Martin Bormann organized the construction of this residence as a birthday present for Adolf Hitler. It was built on top of a mountain, 1,834 meters above sea level. Several key decisions of World War II were made at this location. It can still be visited today. No one imagined that the established deadline would be met when work began on the Kehlstein house, known as the Eagle's Nest. Delivering it on time was an essential part of the plan. It was an ambitious and expensive project that Bormann prepared for his superior, although the gift was presented as a gesture from the Nazi Party. The building was located on a mountaintop, designed with luxury but also with durability. What makes this construction so unique is not only its style, but the fact that it is one of the few properties linked to Hitler that remain standing. For those visiting that area of Bavaria, it became an almost obligatory stop. Bormann was impressed by the complexity of the challenge. Nothing had been prepared. Roads had to be cut to the base, rock drilled, and materials hauled to the top. Time was running out. It seemed unlikely it would be ready before Hitler's birthday. However, it was completed just in time. The cost was enormous. And not just in money. 12 workers died during the construction. Bormann ordered non-stop work in rotating shifts. At night, the area was lit with makeshift lanterns. A route of more than 6 kilometers had to be opened, carving into the mountain, breaking stone, and leveling the terrain. A mountain path leading to the house was also adapted, and an elevator was built so Hitler could ascend. This part was the most costly and the most dangerous. A vertical tunnel had to be dug inside the mountain. A cable car was also built to transport the materials. Hundreds of workers were hired who worked in extremely harsh conditions, carrying heavy loads for very long hours. Some parts of the house were already assembled to speed up assembly, as if it were a prefabricated structure. The total expenditure, adjusted to today's values, is estimated to have exceeded $150 million. A joke spread around the town as they watched the construction foremen and workers pass by. They said it was like a gold rush, but instead of searching for metals in the rivers, they just had to stand under a window and wait for Bormann to throw the money down from above. Albert Speer wrote in his memoirs that this construction, despite some criticism of its wastefulness, reflected Hitler's changing lifestyle and his tendency to remain increasingly isolated. This wasn't explained solely by fear of an attack, as he admitted thousands of people daily to show their support. The name Eagle's Nest was given to it by the French ambassador André-François Poncet, impressed by the view and the technical difficulties that had been overcome. The nickname immediately caught on. One of the reasons for building this place was that it was close to the Berghof, another of Hitler's main residences where he spent much of the year. He spent so much time there that it eventually became a parallel headquarters of the German government. Years earlier, after his release from prison in 1924, he rented a modest house in that alpine area where he took refuge to consider his next steps. He liked the place so much that he bought it in 1932, according to official reports, with the money earned from publishing his book, My Struggle. In 1936, the simple house was transformed into a 30-room mansion. Number 3. Absolute silence. Hitler's phobia of noise controlled everything. He hated loud noises and bustle. In his personal residences, especially at the Berghof, sounds that disrupted the calm were not tolerated. Every action had to be done without raising one's voice or making a sound. Doors could not be slammed. Conversations, even among employees, were limited. No one was allowed to speak at a normal volume if he was nearby. There were rules for everything, even walking. The staff had to move with soft steps. They trained themselves to step without their heels echoing in the hallways. Some wore special footwear with rubber soles so as not to disturb the atmosphere he wanted to maintain. Albert Speer, who accompanied him for years, noted that Hitler easily lost his temper if he heard an inappropriate laugh, a slammed door, or a sloppy step. Stiffness was part of the routine. Visitors knew they had to behave in an almost military manner. Everything had to flow without interruption. Orders were short. Talks only began if he initiated them. No one interrupted him. No one spoke without permission. Even his closest aides, like Heinz Ling, knew that any sound could be disruptive. In the Berghof dining rooms, for example, extended periods of complete silence were observed. Cutlery was not allowed to make a sound. Plates were not allowed to slide across the tablecloth. Waiters had to serve food with minimal movement. If something was dropped or bumped, the tension was immediately noticeable. One glance from them was enough to make everything freeze. The films he watched were projected without sound or with the volume at minimum. He couldn't stand loud effects. He preferred still images, no music, no rapid-fire dialogue. Sometimes he would interrupt the screening if the volume got too loud. During breaks, his spaces were soundproofed. Those who cleaned his room or hallways had to do so at specific times when he wasn't around. If he heard a vacuum cleaner running, he would order it to stop immediately. He never grew accustomed to the noise of machines. He couldn't stand motors running near him. The political meetings held at the Berghof also followed these rules. Although several people participated, voices were always kept low. No one raised their voice. If someone spoke louder than usual, they were excluded from future invitations. He imposed calm with his mere presence. It wasn't necessary to say it twice. Everything that happened around him had to adapt to his rhythm, and that rhythm was slow, measured, uneventful. He wanted to be surrounded by silence. He wanted to avoid any stimulus he couldn't control. I wanted even the air to seem still. Number 2. The Secret Library. More than 1,000 books revealed his hidden obsessions. In the spring of 1945, near Berchtesgaden, inside a salt mine, the 101st Airborne Division found some 3,000 books. After a lengthy review in Munich that lasted until 1952, the volumes were sent to the US Library of Congress. They belonged to Hitler. Once on American soil, they were reviewed again. Those that did not bear his signature or dedications to him became part of the general collection. Replica copies were redistributed to other libraries or offered to the public through their exchange system. In the end, some 1,200 books were stored. They remain there today on the 3rd floor of the Jefferson Building under a sign that reads, Third Reich Collection. The Soviets also kept thousands more, some 10,000 books. But due to the regime's secrecy, it is unknown what they did with them. It is estimated that Hitler's entire library once contained some 17,000 copies. Gerhard Weinberg, one of the first to analyze them, commented that many seem to have never been read. Many of them were gifts from authors and publishers, as is often the case with politicians, and there were almost no signs of use. Philip Gassert and Daniel Matten confirmed this in their research. In 2001, they published a list of more than 500 pages, with transcriptions of dedications and copies of Hitler's personal bookplate, an eagle holding a swastika on an oak branch. This seal summed up his vision of power and nationalism. Among the titles, one stood out, The Current Tasks of German Politics by Paul Lagarde, a 19th-century nationalist author. Hitler had marked with 2 lines a sentence about relocating Polish and Austrian Jews to Palestine. Other books bore similar marks, double, sometimes triple, underlining and pencil notes in his slanted handwriting. He read fragments, pondered them, and wrote brief commentaries. This is how he constructed part of his thinking from that library. Some copies reinforced his ideology. One was The International Jew, an anti-Semitic text written in 1920 by businessman Henry Ford. Another, A Racial Science of the German People from 1929, was by Hans Günther, a Nazi racial theorist who sold more than 500,000 copies. He also had Germania, written in 98 AD by Tacitus, a classic that idealized the German people and which the Nazis treated almost like a Bible. But the most used, due to visible wear, was Heigel's pocket manual on tanks from 1935, which featured the concept of blitzkrieg. His collection also included books on esoteric subjects. One of them was a reissue of an old 18th-century alchemy treatise. This type of material caught the attention of Himmler, the extermination camp commander and leader of the Teutonic Order. Although the Nazis weren't particularly fond of English writers, Hitler did have a special place for Shakespeare. He had his complete works in German, edited by Georg Müller in 1925, bound in brown leather and bearing the initials AH on the spine. His favorite was Julius Caesar. In a personal notebook, he had drawn the assassination scene in the Roman Forum. He knew the text by heart. He would often repeat the phrase, "We'll meet again at Philippi," as a threat, copying the ghost's warning to Brutus. He also had classics like Robinson Crusoe and Don Quixote. He said each represented a great idea. In Robinson Crusoe, he saw the development of civilization. In Don Quixote, the end of an era. His favorite edition was the one illustrated by Doré, with drawings of the knight lost in his fantasies. He probably paused more than once over the scene where the books are burned. Number 1. He feared bombing even in the Alps. He ordered secret tunnels to be dug under his shelters. He feared attacks from the air, even in remote areas. Although his bases were far from major cities, he always ordered tunnels and underground hiding places to be built for protection. The most famous was the one he ordered excavated right beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. The so-called Führerbunker was built in 2 phases and ended up being his last command post. He also requested similar structures at other key locations. One of the largest was the Ries project in southern Poland, with enormous underground corridors dug beneath the Owl Mountains near Książ Castle. Each shelter followed a similar layout. They had thick concrete walls, secret passages, and protected exits. They were used to hide and remain in command without having to go outside. His fear of bombing was only part of the reason. He also wanted to always have a center from which he could continue giving orders even if everything fell apart. His obsession with safety led him to demand everything: alternative exits, camouflaged tunnels, hidden entrances, and smoke and gas filters. These weren't simple basements. They were true underground operations centers with command rooms, storage rooms, dormitories, electrical systems, and independent ventilation. Everything was designed so that he could continue to function independently of what was happening above. These types of constructions showed how he thought about the end. He wanted to disappear underground, continue to control everything, and for no one to be able to find him even if everything around him collapsed. Looking at these situations one by one, it's clear that what was said about him didn't match what actually happened in his daily life. His routines, his gestures when no one was recording him, and his private decisions were carefully guarded to keep them hidden. What was seen in public was prepared to leave a clear impression, but without revealing everything. Everything was planned: the places where he lived, who accompanied him, what was said out loud, and what was left unsaid. Everything followed fixed rules. Whatever didn't fit his image was eliminated. Over time, documents, memories, and records came to light that showed another side, a side that had been deliberately hidden. What seemed solid was more of a setup. And although much can be reconstructed today, there are still pieces missing. There are details that remain hidden and parts of his story that were never told.